Ciao friends! Let's see how to display the information about dynamic pricing of the seats on a plane by using Power BI and Synoptic Panel. In this example, we see that the information about the sales, the aggregated sales of multiple flights have been aggregated into this visualization, where we are interested to see how the sales went by using a dynamic pricing system, looking at the seats that produced more revenues and the seats that had lower performances. So you see that the idea is that we have basically information about the seat number, the revenues produced for each seat, and this is the classic table that you produce as a result of the analysis in a semantic model. But if we want to translate this information into something graphical, we need something like what we see here, which is the representation of the plane with the seat map. Maybe something also, you could find a better design for that. We started with simple rectangle here, or squares, that have been colored depending on the class of the ticket, of the category of the ticket. And of course, the information can be used in different ways. First, we can color the area depending on the class or depending on the level of revenues that we reached. We could also use other dynamic visualization types by coloring depending on the revenues. So using a dynamic formatting based on the revenues, for example. And we can also use this as a way to select seats. For example, if I decide to select all the seats that are in this row, then not in this row, but in this position of the plane, so several rows for the D class, for the D seat, and we see the total amount of revenues of these seats, and of course we could add also other information. So let's say that the Synoptic Panel allows me to get a map or just a graphical drawing and transform it into something that we use to display data by coloring areas, for example. And how do we obtain that? So what is the process to do that? First of all, we need the design of the plane with the areas that we want to potentially color. This file should be exported in an SVG file, which is a standard that many products support. And then once you import this map into Power BI Desktop, this is the design environment of Synoptic Panel. So this is the report in Power BI Desktop where we can configure the mapping that we have for this map. So in this case, we have a single map. We could have multiple layers, but in this case, we have only one. We could certainly have multiple maps in this case because we might have different planes with different seats arrangements, and so we need different types of map depending on the plane. And what we do then is that we have to create a binding between the object, the graphical objects that we want to highlight, that we want to color, and the corresponding data in our model. This is done by using this editor where you see that we have here all the elements of the drawing, but we can filter only those that in this case are matched because we already created the match. You see that these are colored in green. So basically what we have here, let me zoom this a little bit, we have the name that we have in the SVG file. So every element is drawn by assigning also a name, like a label, not a label but an ID. And you can see that. So the SVG file is basically similar to an HTML file that has this information that you see here. So the ID is the name that I was referencing before. So this is the name that we see there, and you see that there are many names that we do not color, that we don't want to bind to the data, and there are other elements. If I scroll down, like these are the seats, and the ID in this case is just a number. It could be A1, A2, and so on. In this case, to make it simpler to prepare the demo, we just use the number, but in the real world, you probably have the letter and the number. Now, in this case, we have a complete correspondence between the name of the object of the ID in the SVG file and the corresponding value in the data. So we are using the auto-bind setting. So auto-bind means that the two names should be the same. However, we could change this. So we could have, for example, that I think that if I If I highlight this, it is more visible. So you see that if I select one element, 4 is bound to 4, because again, we have the automatic binding. But we could manually change it, and so we could say that 4 is connected to A1, or the opposite. A1 is connected to 4, depending on what you have to map into your specific data. So this is the information that remains in the visual, and this translation enables the visual to translate the data coming from the model into something that color a particular area. And you see that this is a very generic way to create a dynamic visualization that can color any map. So we can transform any drawing into something that can display the information in a graphical way by coloring areas. So if you have a similar problem, or you know something that are a similar problem, just forward the link to this video, forward the link to the article where we describe the use case for that on the 𝗀𝗏𝗧 website. And this is the use case for visualizing seed purchasing patterns with the Synoptic Panel in Power BI. You will find many more details in this article about how we implemented the solution. And of course, this is a demo that is very generic, but is representative of what several companies are already doing with Synoptic Panel.